As of this week, Trump has said the ceasefire with Iran is barely holding on. But the most dangerous thing happening in this conflict is not what anyone is talking about in Washington's meeting rooms or on TV channels in Tel Aviv. It is something much quieter, something far more careful and planned. And when it finally arrives, it will not look like the wars we have seen before. It will not start with a loud explosion. It will start with silence. The silence of ports that no longer work, of roads that no longer connect cities, of runways so badly damaged that the planes carrying military supplies can no longer land. And when that silence comes, the most powerful military force in the Middle East will have only days before it starts falling apart from the inside. Pay very close attention to what I am about to tell you, because this is not drama, this is math. There is a conversation that serious military experts have been having in private. The politicians on both sides of the Atlantic have been too distracted, too stuck in old comfortable beliefs, or perhaps too scared to have this conversation out loud. It is about what Iran has actually been doing these past several months, underneath all the missile launches and intercepted drones and dramatic satellite pictures that fill our news. Because when you cut through all the theater and look at how Iran has actually been behaving, with the cold eye of someone who understands how real armies work, not how they look in press releases or political speeches, but how they actually work, what they eat up, what they depend on, and where they are truly weak. A picture appears that is not just alarming. For those willing to see it clearly, it is actually very revealing. A modern army does not run on courage. That is something you say at funerals and on statues. A modern army runs on supplies, on fuel measured in hundreds of thousands of liters per group of soldiers per day, on bullets and shells fired by the thousands during just a few hours of heavy fighting, on food, water, spare parts, and medical supplies moving through an invisible system of ports, storage facilities, roads, and railway lines. Without that system, the most advanced weapon on Earth becomes, within days, an expensive and completely useless piece of metal. The ancient Roman armies understood this. Napoleon learned it in a devastating way on his march to Moscow. The German army discovered it on the frozen plains of Russia, and now in the ancient and fought-over land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. We are watching an enemy that has studied this lesson with extraordinary patience and precision begin to position itself to use it. An advisor to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps stated publicly that Iran's military facilities are so large that they have not yet shown the majority of what they can do, and that Iran has enough firepower to strike Israel every single day for 2 full years without running out. Read that sentence again. Not weeks, not months, 2 years of daily strikes. And yet, the conversation in Western capitals is still focused on air defense systems and how many missiles get shot down, as if the question of whether any single missile gets through is the most important question. It is not. The real question is this: what happens when Iran stops aiming at military bases and starts aiming at the roads, ports, and fuel lines that allow those military bases to work at all? Recent data from the opening weeks of the 2026 conflict shows that Iran kept firing missiles at Israel for multiple days in a row. Even as Israel continuously bombed Iranian launch sites, Iran absorbed the pressure. It did not stop. It tested. It measured. It studied how fast Israel responded. It found gaps in Israel's defense cover. It recorded which targets caused which defensive reactions. Every wave of missiles was both a weapon and an information gathering tool at the same time. The careful, patient behavior hidden inside those attacks is not the behavior of a country acting out of panic. It is the behavior of a country that believes time and target selection are working in its favor. Israel has 3 major ports where outside military supplies arrive: Haifa in the north, Ashdod on the central Mediterranean coast, and Eilat on the Red Sea. These 3 ports together are the entry points for everything Israel's military needs to keep operating. They are not just logistically important, they are survival level important. Without working ports, Israel cannot receive the large shipments of ammunition, heavy equipment, aviation fuel, and enormous amounts of other material that a military needs when it is fighting a war. And the question Iran has been answering through its test strikes over recent months is not whether it can hit those ports. It is whether it can destroy specifically the equipment needed to unload cargo, the cranes, the fuel pipes, the rail connections, the storage warehouses, in enough numbers and with enough accuracy that resupply by sea becomes impossible, no matter how many ships the United States sends. This is not guesswork. This is pattern recognition based on what we can actually observe Iran doing. The question is not whether Iran has built up this capability based on everything the evidence shows it has. The question, the one that should be keeping every serious military strategist awake at night, is when and under what conditions they will choose to use it. If this kind of honest and serious analysis of world events is what you are here for, if you believe the world deserves more than comfortable lies dressed up as expert opinion, then subscribe right now, because what comes in part 2 is the part that Washington does not want you to understand. As Trump declared the ceasefire barely alive, and as Iran's parliament speaker responded that the Islamic Republic's military is ready to teach a lesson to any attacker, the truly careful observer notices something that the news cycle, by its very nature, is simply not built to capture. It is not the words that matter. Words are the noise that powerful countries make to manage their own citizens and send warnings to other countries. What matters is the pattern of the targeting, the specific, organized, deliberate pattern of what Iran has chosen to hit, and what it has very noticeably chosen not to hit yet. Because in that restraint lies the most important military message Iran is sending, and almost nobody in the Western strategic world is reading it correctly. Think about the math of military supplies at the ground level, because this is where big abstract strategies meet the impossible to reverse physical reality of armies fighting in the field. An Israeli armored brigade, meaning a large group of tanks and fighting vehicles conducting active operations, does not use fuel the way a regular person driving to work does. It uses approximately 180,000 liters every single day. That accounts for tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, self-propelled artillery, engineering vehicles, and the supply trucks feeding the brigade itself. Multiply that number across all of the armored units Israel currently has deployed, and the total daily fuel need runs into millions of liters. Israel's frontline units carry enough fuel for roughly 3 to 5 days of operations. That buffer exists to handle short-term supply problems. It is absolutely not designed to keep a military running when the entire supply system has been cut off at its source. Ammunition works the same way. A single artillery battalion firing heavily can fire hundreds of rounds in a single day. Add up all the artillery systems deployed, tank shells, anti-tank missiles, mortar rounds, and precision-guided bombs for aircraft, and the total daily consumption is staggering. The frontline ammunition storage sites exist so that fighting can continue while resupply flows in from the rear. If that flow stops, if the storage sites are on fire, and the trucks cannot move because the bridges are destroyed, then what an Israeli unit has in its hands at the exact moment the supply line is cut is precisely and exactly everything it will ever have. And once it is used up, it is gone. Now understand what Iran's targeting strategy, if and when it shifts to supply infrastructure, actually means step by step. Phase 1 would not try to sink ships in a dramatic sea battle. It would aim to destroy the specific mechanical and construction equipment needed to move cargo from ships to shore at Israel's port facilities. Cranes, fuel unloading systems, rail connections, storage warehouses. Destroy those and the ships waiting just offshore become irrelevant. Their cargo cannot be reached. Phase 2 would not waste missiles on individual trucks driving through the country. It would strike the infrastructure those trucks cannot go around. Bridge crossings on major supply routes, rail bridges, highway overpasses, tunnels that represent unavoidable narrow points. When you destroy a bridge, you do not just stop the vehicles crossing it at that moment. You stop every vehicle that needs to use that road until the bridge is completely rebuilt. And in a country the size of Israel, with a limited number of major north, south, and east-west highways, destroying several bridges at the same time does not create a traffic problem. It creates a stranglehold. When Iran shut the Strait of Hormuz following the February 2026 strikes by the United States and Israel, it demonstrated this exact logic of using infrastructure as a weapon of war, cutting off not armies directly, but the supply lines feeding them. The strait closure was a proof of concept at the large scale. applied at the ground level against Israel's internal supply network, the same idea becomes a tightening grip rather than a blockade, slowly and invisibly squeezing tighter until the force that depended on that network can no longer survive in the field. Phase 3 is the most unsettling part of this analysis, and it is the part that most directly challenges the comfortable belief that keeping information secret provides safety. Israel maintains a spread-out network of frontline supply storage sites, hardened facilities containing pre-stored ammunition, fuel, and supplies designed to keep military operations going when rear area supply lines come under attack. The locations of these facilities are among the most carefully protected secrets in Israeli military planning. And yet, Iranian strikes in recent months have repeatedly hit facilities whose military functions were never publicly admitted. Facilities where satellite images taken afterward revealed ammunition storage bunkers, fuel tank farms, and pre-positioned equipment. That kind of targeting intelligence does not build up by accident. It represents years of careful intelligence gathering on the battlefield. Human spies, signals interception, commercial satellite image analysis, carried out with a patience and thoroughness that Western assessments have consistently underestimated. And then there is the backup plan that American military planners automatically reach for when faced with a supply vulnerability: emergency strategic airlift. The United States has substantial heavy airlift capacity, C-17 Globemasters and C-5 Galaxies capable of moving enormous amounts of cargo across entire continents. But strategic airlift requires working airfields with runways long enough and structurally strong enough to receive heavy aircraft. Iranian strikes during the 2026 conflict closed Israeli airspace for several days, disrupting operations at Ben Gurion and other airports across the country. Iranian military planners understand with complete precision that disabling runways does not require destroying entire airports. It requires creating deep underground craters in enough places on runway surfaces to prevent heavy aircraft from landing safely. Achieve that at Ben Gurion and Ramon, and the relevant Israeli Air Force bases, and American airlift operation, no matter how many aircraft are waiting on runways in Delaware and California, delivers absolutely nothing. As of May 15, 2026, Iran has declared that it has not agreed on uranium enrichment terms with the United States. Nuclear negotiations remain completely stuck, and Trump himself has told Iran it can either make a deal or face total destruction. The language being used in diplomacy is getting harsher. The tension is rising. And in that rising tension, the critical analytical question is not whether these two sides want war. Rational countries rarely want war in the abstract. The question is whether the conditions for a catastrophic mistake have been created. Whether the gap between what each side thinks the other will accept and what the other will actually accept has grown so wide that the next escalating step lands not on a negotiating table, but on a supply depot that Israel cannot afford to lose. Let us directly address the question that naturally follows from everything in this analysis. What is Israel's answer? What does a strategic response to a supply line destruction campaign actually look like? And here we must be honest in a way that is uncomfortable for anyone who believes in the story of Israeli military invincibility. There is no good answer. Not because Israeli military planners are incompetent. They clearly are not. But because the weaknesses being exploited are structural, built into the physical geography of a small country with limited port access, limited road and rail corridors, and a forward deployed military that consumes material at rates that peacetime supply infrastructure was simply never designed to handle under sustained precision attacks. Israel cannot stop enough Iranian missiles from reaching their targets to prevent supply line destruction. Data confirms that even under continuous Israeli airstrikes targeting Iranian launch sites, Iran maintained steady missile fire against Israel. The interception rate was never zero, and it never will be. In a supply line destruction campaign, the attacking side does not need to be perfect. It needs to damage enough critical points that the entire system stops working. One destroyed crane at Haifa does not stop the port. 3 destroyed cranes, plus the fuel unloading system, plus the main railway connection to the inland distribution network, may very well stop it entirely. Israel cannot quickly repair the kind of damage that a sustained precision campaign against infrastructure would create. We're not talking about filling in potholes. We're talking about rebuilding specialized port equipment with manufacturing wait times measured in months, rebuilding bridge structures requiring serious engineering work, repairing runway damage that prevents heavy aircraft from operating. These are not problems that national willpower and military discipline can fix within a time window that actually matters on the battlefield. The United States cannot make up for the difference through emergency resupply fast enough to matter. A single large container ship carries more cargo than many dozens of C-17 flights. Keeping an army of 120,000 soldiers supplied through air delivery alone when the ports are destroyed and the runways are cratered is not a logistics management challenge. It is a physical impossibility at the time scale that actually matters. The conditional ceasefire declared on April 8th came only after weeks of devastating fighting, and talks since then have repeatedly broken down. The ceasefire bought time. It did not fix the underlying strategic imbalance that this entire analysis has been describing. And yet, and this is a point that honest thinking demands, because intellectual fairness requires it. Deterrence is not the same thing as certainty. Iran has not yet carried out the supply line destruction campaign. The fact that it has the capability does not mean the decision to use it has already been made. Talks mediated by Pakistan continue, and both parties have returned to the table repeatedly, even as ceasefire terms remain unresolved. There are people on multiple sides of this conflict who understand the escalating logic described here and are working with varying degrees of desperation and effectiveness to stop it from playing itself out completely. But here is what history teaches, and what no amount of diplomatic optimism can fully answer. Capabilities that exist get used. Strategic advantages that have been carefully built up across years of patient intelligence gathering and operational development do not simply disappear because negotiators are sitting in conference rooms in Pakistan. They remain available. They remain tempting. And in any future moment, when Iran calculates that the cost of holding back is greater than the cost of acting, when pressure from its own citizens, from its military commanders, from the internal logic of the conflict itself tips the calculation over the edge, the option will be right there waiting. What Washington and Tel Aviv owe their citizens is not reassurance. Reassurance, in the face of what the evidence actually shows, would be a form of negligence wearing the costume of leadership. What they owe is honest acknowledgement that a strategic weakness of genuine and serious severity has been allowed to develop, that the adversary has demonstrated both the capability and the intelligence preparation to exploit it, and that the answer to that weakness cannot be found in more interceptor missiles or more diplomatic statements alone. It requires a complete rethinking of how modern military power actually works, not in theory, not in the comfortable abstractions of think tank reports, but in the grinding, material, supply-driven reality of armies that need fuel, ammunition, and food every single day to remain armies at all. The shock, when it comes, will not be that it happened. The shock will be that everyone who was paying attention could see it coming, and almost nobody in a position of authority chose to say it plainly while there was still time to do something about it. What do you think? Is Iran's ceasefire strategy a genuine path to peace, or is it a calculated pause to prepare for the next phase? Tell us in the comments below. Your perspective on this matters, and this conversation needs more informed voices in it. This analysis is for educational and discussion purposes only. The views presented reflect historical and geopolitical research. Always consult credible news sources and form your own informed opinion.